Welcome to our Teen and Tween Craft Program. I'm Miss Carla and I work for the St. Johns County Public Library System. Today we are sewing a soup bowl cozy, and this is to put in the microwave. So when you put your bowl in and you've got your hot soup, when you go to take it out, it'll be a little bit safer. And I want to let you know right away that you do need to use all cotton materials, because if there's any polyester, it may melt or burn. So if you picked up a kit at your library, what you're going to have are two 10-inch squares of cotton fabric and two 9.5-inch squares of cotton batting. I've cut this a little bit smaller so that when you go to sew it together, it won't be as bulky and it'll be easier to sew. And you will also need some pins to pin this together, a marking pin. Now this is a Sewing Disappearing Ink marking pin that I have here, and that might be a good idea for you to pick up sometime if you're going to sew a lot. But if you don't have one of these, you can use any kind of marker that you have. Just be careful that it doesn't bleed through. Most of your marking's actually going to be done on your batting, so it's not going to show. You'll need some scissors and a ruler or a straight edge, and I have a chopstick here for when I turn my project right side out, I'll be able to push it through, and we'll get to that later. So if you did not pick up a kit at the library, just know that you're going to need the two 10-inch squares of fabric and the two 9-inches of batting. So let's go ahead and get started. And one of the things that I was concerned about is I have a ruler that will go across my whole 10 inches just fine, and that's easy. But since you may not have that, what I did, and I'm using a piece of paper so this will show up better, I folded you can fold your project, and here I'm using the piece of paper, I'll do it again, and I've made a dot in the middle. And what I'm going to do is we're going to draw diagonally on here to draw some sewing lines. So I'm going to draw from here to here. Then I'm going to match up my line with the other corner and go on across. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to use my big ruler on the other side in case you have something. If you just have something that's long enough that has a straight edge, you can use that, but if you're using your ruler, that's how you would do that. So the lines that we're drawing, this is what you're doing. You're drawing the lines, and this would be your batting side, because that's where you're going to draw your lines for your stitching. But it would look like this. So it's from corner to corner. All right, now go ahead and do that. I'm going to put my piece of paper out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and do that on my batting. Now what I've done is I've put a couple of pins in place so that this won't shift while I'm drawing my lines. So I'm going to go from corner to corner on my fabric. Across there. Okay. And again, I'll go ahead and show you how I would do that. I already folded this in quarters and found my center line, and I'll just do that again. Okay, so I have my lines drawn. And now I need to put some more pins in there to keep it from shifting while I sew. So I'm going to put it up here near the corner so that that doesn't shift as we start stitching. The reason I pin this afterwards is because if I had the pins in there and then I put the ruler on top and tried to draw the lines, it would be a lot more difficult. So I'm going to put a few pins up that line on both sides. we're going to remove these as we sew. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the sewing machine. So here we are at the sewing machine, and as you can see, I have about 1/4 of an inch of the fabric on each side of my batting. I have my uptake lever up here so that my needle doesn't come unthreaded. And now we're going to start with our presser foot on the corner of our batting, and we're just going to sew across. And we need to remove our pins as we go. So I'm going to clip my thread there, and I'm going to go across to the other side. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to be making our darts, which is going to make the bowl shape. Okay, so the next step that we are going to do is to make the darts. They're going to look like this when we're done, and this is what we're shooting for this next step. Now, everything that we've done so far and what we're going to do here, you're going to do twice, because right now we've just done it with our first piece of cloth and our first piece of batting. You'll be repeating this on the sewing machine, but let's go ahead and I'll show you how to turn this flat piece of fabric into this bowl shape. So let's go ahead. Now we're going to fold it in half the other way. So you've got the right sides of the fabric together, and you fold it like this, and we are going to mark this a dot 2 inches down on our, let me open that up, okay. On our batting, we're going to put this at 2 inches. We're going to come over here to our cloth, and we're going to put a dot at 1 inch. And then we are going to draw a line between the two dots, like that, and I'm going to go ahead and put a pin there to kind of hold it in place. I'm going to do the same thing, making sure that my cloth is nice and even on both sides. Everything's nice and folded perfectly in half. So 2 inches down from the edge of my fabric to right there, and put a little dot on my batting, and then go over to 1 inch on my piece of cloth. And draw a line. So here, as you can see, I've got a line here and a line here. And normally I would stop and sew this, but this time I'm not, because I want to go ahead and get this all recorded. So I'm going to come over here and do it like this. But for you, it would be best if you stopped and then did the first two and then the last two. But for our purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and do my okay, and we'll need to go back over to the sewing machine. Okay, so here we are. I've got my line, as you can see, where I have marked my dart, and I'm going to start sewing from the point out to the edge. And I'm going to actually kind of start my needle, I think. I'm going to manually get that stuck in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew across it. I am going to back stitch just a little bit at the edge. And then I bring that up. And then we're going to repeat that for the other 3. Okay, I now have the 4 sewn together, and as you can see, we now have our shape, that bowl shape. We need to go ahead and trim our darts. So you're going to cut right up next to your stitching. And let's see, I've got one more. And if you want to make this a little bit easier, you can kind of finger press open your seams a little bit. It's just kind of open your seams, rub it a little bit. And I've already kind of done that with my other one. So I'm just kind of opening those up just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to start by matching right sides together. So I've got to turn that inside out first and match up those seams as best I can. So here, I don't know if you can see that, but just kind of bring those seams up together. Kind of open them up a little bit if you can. I'm going to stick a pin there to hold that together. I'm going to pin my corners. So it's best to go ahead and pin your seams and corners together first, and then you can go for the middle. Okay, I had all my corners and my seams together, so now I'm going to start pinning in between. But there's one thing that I need to do to be sure of, and that is we have to leave an opening for turning. Now you don't want to do your turning on your corners, and you don't want to do it on your seams. So I'm going to pick out a spot here, and I am going to not sew here, and I'm going to put a pin over here and let's see, I'm going to start here. So I'm going to put another pin right down here to remind myself not to sew when I get there. And you could also take your pin and put maybe a dot there. So I'm going to start right here, and what I'm doing is I am actually sewing right, I'm going to be sewing right on the right outside of that batting. I'm not actually sewing through the batting on this step. I'm just going to sew right along it. If you go over the batting, that's not a problem at all. But this is to manage the bulk. And I'm going to start here, and I'm going to sew pretty slowly because I'm going to have to kind of turn a little bit, because as you can see, this kind of makes a slight V shape, and we're not making a full corner turn, but it wouldn't hurt to treat it like you were doing a corner. I'm actually going to back up just a little bit to give myself a little. Okay, so I'm going to start sewing again. My uptake lever's up here. I'm going to start my seaming. Okay. And I'm not sewing on the batting, I'm sewing right along the edge. Now I'm kind of at that seam where it turns. I'm gonna bring my needle down manually, and then I'm gonna kind of turn it. Not like you're doing a corner on a full corner, but it just kind of helps. So I'm sewing right along my batting, but not on it. But if you do stitch over your batting, it's not a big deal. Okay, now I am at a corner, so I've got my needle down, and I'm going to turn it. Okay, so I'm getting near the end, and I'm on a corner. I'm going to turn my corner, and here's where I marked my pin the other way, so I know I've gone all the way around. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to sew up to where my pin is, where I'm going to end, and then I'm going to back stitch. Because when we go to turn this, it's going to be a lot of pressure and it's liable to come undone. Okay, so I've sewn all the way around. I'm going to lift this up. And my next step is, well, first I've got to take all these pins out. And that I didn't already. And then I'm going to find my opening. Now, you're turning, you're going to bring this up and turn it right side out through your opening. Once I have that turned out, now this is kind of tricky. You kind of have to go up and push your corners out. And I'm using my chopstick to push my corners in. Push them out. So I'm doing that. And a lot of times you clip your corners, but because there's a lot of wear and tear on this, I really didn't do that too much. So once I've kind of got that shaped, okay. So the next thing is I'm actually going to take my chopstick and kind of go up in there a little bit more, and I'm going to go up along the seams. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm kind of taking my chopstick and kind of pushing my seam out. kind of taking that rod and whatever you would have. Sometimes I use a crochet hook. I'm kind of pushing the seam out just to make it come together a little better, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to where our seam is all the way up at the edge. I don't know if you can see that, but I want my stitches to be right along the edge there. Okay, you can also kind of do that by rolling it here, which is kind of complicated. But as you can see, okay, so my last step here is I need to bring my seam allowance up and fold it under where my opening was. And I need to bring it all together. And I would actually iron it before this next step, but we're not going to do this today. But I'm just bringing all of that up, bringing my seam allowances together. Don't know if you can see that, but anyway, I'm going to bring all that seam allowance together. All right, so the final step that we're going to do is we are actually going to top stitch all around at 1/4 of an inch, and this is what's going to, and on my machine, it's right on this line, so at 1/4 of an inch, which is what we've been doing all along, I'm going to go ahead and top stitch all the way around. I'm back at that kind of V shape again. So I'm going to go up to my seam, and then I'm going to kind of put my needle down and kind of pivot there so I'll have a nice okay. And when we get up to our corner, we're going to do the same thing, get up to our 1/4 of an inch, leave that. You actually have some stitching there, so it'll look nice if you go up to that stitching. And then turn it around. Okay, I've sewn all the way around and sewn over my first seam where I started just a little bit. And I'm going to take my pins out. And what I would do is I could go over and kind of iron it to shape it up a little bit. But as you can see, we now have a bowl cozy. And thank you so much for joining us again today for sewing. And I want to thank our friends of the library once again for paying for all of our materials. So here we have our little bowl cozy. Thank you.